Hey, Peter, here we are again for Call Me Data.
Hey, David, welcome back. Another great episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. This is going to be an interesting topic, I think. So,
Yeah.
shall we jump right in?
Yeah, let's jump in. It's definitely a bit out of our normal one, but I like this one. Let's roll with it. And otherwise,
Yeah.
I have to make my usual comment about the Aloha shirt. I love it. I always do.
Hey, with it being almost 100 degrees in New York City today, I feel like this is entirely appropriate. So, maybe
It
more
is.
appropriate than ever before. Um,
Oh, it is brutal out today. I know.
it is brutal. So, let's talk about something cool. AI. See what I did there. So, um, our premise today, and I do really like this one because I think humorous as it is, it's also a very serious and important topic, which is the future of AI is boring, and that will be a good thing when it happens. So
I agree.
let's discuss.
Let's
Yeah,
jump right in. Come on, let's start this one. So why don't we just start with the current state of affairs? Because I know in some ways it seems like we're getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves. That the
yeah,
future of AI is boring. Now, of course, we didn't say what timeline that was happening over. But I
right.
do think the premise itself is certainly accurate. I think at some point, much like phones, they become boring. Just they're
Yeah,
there.
that's a great example. I cannot overstate how exciting it was when we were like waiting for the first iPhone to launch, and it was groundbreaking and revolutionary. And
I know.
phones are still progressing rapidly, but they're no longer novelties and toys. They're just sort of boring tools that we use.
And it took a couple of years to get there, and I don't,
Yeah,
know how this will take just as long or longer. I honestly think it'll probably take longer for artificial intelligence. But I do remember the days when the new iPhones came out, or even the first phones came out, and there was this level of excitement, and that just went for years. It's like, oh my God, a new phone's coming out. What features does it have? This is awesome. We got to play with this. Now it's like a new iPhone comes out, and I'm like, oh wow, oh big deal.
yeah. It's like another one I might skip. So let's talk about like
It's just
today AI isn't boring. So what is it? What's the current state?
well, I think the current state today is interesting. I mean, you and I obviously we're in the midst of all this stuff, but I think just we could say observationally, it's used certainly used inconsistently, and
Yeah.
it's still, I think, very much around the periphery. Would you
Yes.
agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I know a handful of people who use AI all day, every day, but I think the vast majority of people that I know, it's a once in a while thing, right? When they have a specific
Yes.
task, they're like, okay, I'm going to try AI for this, but it's inconsistent, as you said.
Right. Like even if you
Yeah.
went out and you just had a random, why don't you ask random people walking by, do you use AI in your daily life or do you use it? And I can guarantee you, 8 out of 10 people will go, "What is AI?" And they certainly don't use it on a regular basis. Um, I think for most of us, for most average users, or for most people out there today, I think even I'll take it a step further. For most organizations, they're definitely not using it on a regular basis. Maybe even though it's embedded in their email tools or it's embedded in some of the tools, so they're using it but not intentionally using it. It's just a byproduct of a feature that's been embedded, but they're not using it with intention to solve specific problems.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And even the people who are using it every day are still using it intermittently during the day. They might use it for one type of task. I know plenty of people who, start out every morning asking their favorite AI model for a summarization of the current news or,
Right.
something similar to that. Or maybe they ask for a summary of what the most important things in their email inbox are. But they have these narrow use cases and then they go back to their old way of working and
Right.
and that's fine. I mean, that's where we are today for a lot of people. It's some cross between a useful tool and a party trick.
Yeah, and it's interesting you put it that way. I agree with you. I think for most people, and I even find ourselves, or certainly me, there are plenty of times when I fall back on old habits very quickly. It's like, oh, I can just go do it,
Right.
not realizing in many cases that there are, the use of any of the models out there is going to benefit me significantly. And I'm still, even after doing this now for a long time, I'm still adjusting my approach and my thinking when I go to solve a problem.
Yeah.
It's, do I use a tool to do this now?
Right. I often have to remind myself to like pause and figure out if there's a way to use AI for what I'm about to do, or even to make myself experiment and say, hey, maybe it'll work if I try this. And you and I always share with each other kind of the ways, interesting ways that we're using it. And the truth is, we're still making up new AI powered workflows, if you want to call it that, as we go, right? Like we're
Oh,
experimenting, we're figuring out how to use the latest and greatest tools and what they're good at, and
absolutely.
yeah,
Well, look at the conversation we had last week. You and I were working on separate projects where um, AI, I immediately fell back into doing something traditionally, which involved a lot of writing. And then I'm like, what? This doesn't make any sense. Let me do this. Why am I doing it this way when I could use AI as a
right.
force multiplier and take the whole entire process, convert it to AI, and use it that way, and finding myself being literally 100 times more efficient than I would have otherwise been. And I think similarly in your case just as well. I was looking at your work
Yeah.
product going as you were showing it to me. I'm like, wow, this is brilliant. This is exactly how everybody should be doing this type of work.
So one aspect of it, as we've just been talking about, is sometimes people just don't know or don't think about using AI for everything they're doing. The other thing that I think is interesting, though, is it still feels to a lot of people like it's cheating, right? Like a lot of people have a stigma or even a sense of shame about using AI. Do you run into that? Do you see people that have that?
Oh, absolutely. I'll even say personally myself that sometimes I'm, like, well, should I be using this? I'm not doing it the hard way. I should be doing it the hard way. Sound like my parents. You got to do things the hard way. If you're not doing it the hard way, you're not a real person. But you know what? And it dawned on me the other day, and I get this constant stream of emails from book publishers to ghostwrite a book. And it dawned on me how many people out there are ghostwriting books and they're putting it forth as their own novel. And I would argue quite a few are doing just that. So it dawned on me like, well, I don't why, AI is a probably a lot better and a lot more efficient.
I mean, that's a great point. We, in all capacities of our professional and personal lives, we hire other people to do things for us, right? You hire
Right.
a marketing firm to come up with campaigns. They aren't your own ideas sometimes. You might hire people to ghostwrite articles or books. So how is this any different? And yet somehow it is. Like people feel a sense of like they're cheating, and you know many times people are explicitly told that using AI is cheating.
Well, I think it can lead to cognitive laziness. Don't get me wrong over here. And I think there was an article I sent over you today that was in the journal editorial about how it. I read the article very quickly, but how it's leading to cognitive laziness, and there are plenty of
Yeah.
students out there using it and pushing out these papers and these articles and not even reading the output and going back and rewriting it appropriately. That to me is not the right use. That to me can be excused cheating. Um, but it's still a tool and it should be used, and it's a
Yeah.
highly effective tool. And that
And
stigma,
like any tool, it can be used well or it can be misused. So
right,
um,
right.
it's, yeah.
It's the old expression, "A fool with the tool is still a fool,"
Yeah.
and I think that's still
Yes.
it readily holds true
Yes.
today.
Yeah. No, it's funny though. I think, you're an avid woodworker, and yet if
Hmm?
you had to build something, you wouldn't feel like you could only use hand tools that weren't electrified, right?
No, no. As you and I have discussed, I watch videos of people building furniture by hand, and I go, "Wow, I admire their skill. It's incredible. I wish I can do that." But never in a million years would I sit and not use power tools to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I go back and forth sometimes. I have to admit, sometimes when I'm using AI to do some work, I feel like, oh boy, am I cheating? And the good part of that is, I think you and I both take a lot of care to make sure that it's our ideas that are being, well, I'll say, amplified and help us
Right.
get them down on paper with AI. Um, but then the other part of me is like, I'm actually cheating myself if I don't use the best tools available. And
Well, right.
yeah. And if you're a student, AI is going to be here for a long time. And it is sort of unconscionable to me that students shouldn't be taught to use AI appropriately and effectively, not as a crutch to substitute for their own rigor in thinking, but as a tool to help them create content, to create papers and research and things like that.
100%. I mean, it's funny, but we have this stigma associated with doing this type of work with these tools. It almost feels for most that it's wrong. And there is very much a stigma associated with it, that doing intellectual, let's call it intellectual or the product of thinking type of work, it's wrong to use tools. But we don't think twice about using tools to do everything else.
Right.
And we would never consider doing things by hand because tools are time savers. They are efficiency gainers. They give us freedom and to do other things. And why isn't it any different with AI tools? Why would I not use
Yeah.
a tool that gives me, it's a force multiplier. As you and I have said, it's a force multiplier of Peter and David. We can now do more than we otherwise ever would possibly be able to do.
Right. And I think there's a third factor at work here too. So if you have the knowledge, we talked about the knowledge gap and people not thinking about using it for everything. Let's say you have the knowledge. Let's say you have no shame or you got over the stigma of using AI. The last part is it's still too hard, right? There's a lot of amazing capabilities out there in models, but
Right.
it just doesn't all work together the way it should. And there's still a lot of, deciding which tool to use for which part of a task and stitching them together yourself or copying and pasting things between tools. It's
Right.
just, it's not as easy as it should be. Um, do you
No.
find that to be true?
Oh, I 100% find that to be true. I think there are a lot of models. They operate differently. They even everything from their interfaces are different to the kind of output that they come out with is different. And even the project I'm working on now, I went through four different models. I
Right.
tried many different things. I went through God knows how many permutations before I landed on a solution that is it's good. It's not great. It works for me and I get the job done, but it is not great. Um, but there's nothing out there that would do it from end to end and make it easy for me right now. But I like where I landed, but it's not a cakewalk and it's not
Right.
something that anybody can do. Um,
No, we've had to effectively create our own processes for using some of these models, right? Like when
yes,
you and I were sharing some examples the other day, we're each using three or four different tools and different models and trying to,
right,
we're being the glue to make them work together. And that's
right,
harder than it should be. So
right.
current state, it's anything but boring. It's exciting. It's exciting because it still feels new and different. It's exciting because it feels somehow illicit and like you're cheating. And it's exciting in quotes because you have to work pretty hard at it, right? It doesn't just happen for you.
No, no, not even close. It's obviously taking an email and rewriting an email or changing the tone of the email or using better verbs or grammatical checks. That stuff is easy. I mean, anybody, and then it's integrated into all tools. But you get outside of that and you start doing things that are fairly complicated. I mean, I was using it to write an SOW and do the diagramming in an SOW because I didn't feel like going through and, with one of the tools out there generating diagrams. So I went into one of the tools and I typed out the architecture and I said, generate it. And I thought, just give me the output so I can put it into the tool and I could then manipulate it further. It was far from a cakewalk.
Right. Right. I'm smiling because I feel your pain having been through similar situation. So
Yep.
let's talk about, I think, there is a subgroup of people out there that are sort of prolific users of AI. They're sort of work or live in an AI first world. And they sort of, to me, they sort of point in the direction of where I think all of us will be going in the near future, or maybe not so near future, but in the future.
Right.
And then we can talk about like what it means when AI gets boring. But who are these? How would you describe these AI first people that are really using AI effectively?
Like us, we use it effectively.
Yeah.
Um, That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, look, I think software developers tend to use it very effectively, but I can't say as a group of people I say as a whole are using AI effectively. I think, there are those that are early adopters. I mean, look, and again, to me, that's software engineers that are early adopters and starting to learn how to use it effectively and integrate it into their workflow and, accelerate the software development processes. Maybe academics are using it earlier than most, but outside of that, and marketing folks, I think are early adopters and they use it. But I don't know any group that's using it for everything or every part of the day yet.
No,
What about you?
I think it's sporadic. I think you're right. I don't think there's any cohorts of people who naturally are using it more. I think it's more individuals who have maximized the use. And I have one idea about who these people are, or maybe characteristics of them when they use it. And I think, and some of this is what I've learned too. I think it's people who move from the place of where we all start, which is like, wow, this is like the easy button. Like I can just ask a question and get all these answers. You know, you've seen the old comic strip about, well, it's been out there for a couple of years now, comic strip about someone who's writing an email and they're like, look, I can type one bullet point and AI can turn it into an entire email that I'll pretend I wrote. And the person
Right.
who receives it says, look, I can use AI to condense this long email into one
Into a
bullet
bullet
point and
bullet
pretend I read
point.
the email.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we originally all thought, oh, this is the easy button. And I think for the people who are AI first, one of the hallmarks is you recognize there is no easy button, and actually is it requires a lot of effort. It
It
requires, and we
does.
talked about the effort to string together different tools and the effort you went through in your example to find the right model and the right ways of using those models. And the other thing that pops into my head is, I think like everyone, when I first started using generative AI, just playing around with it, my prompts were, I was lucky if they were a full sentence, right?
Yeah.
Now I open up a scratch pad and I work on a prompt. And I sometimes work on that prompt for 45 minutes and I might have a
Mhm.
two-page prompt. Then I feed it into a model. And so
Right.
it's less about quick and easy and more about if I put enough effort into it, I can get a very high quality output. And it still, at the end of the day, is more efficient than doing it all manually. But it's not the easy button. It's a powerful tool that you have to put a lot of effort into using well. Does that make sense with you? Does that resonate?
Oh, 100%. I want to add one little thing to that. No, I think you're absolutely
Yeah.
correct. And I'm very similar in my respect. I started with small prompts and now I write, small novels sometimes because that's how
Yeah.
you get the
Right.
most out of the model. But let me ask you a question. And this I think was interesting. And I think this is a point that we need to maybe expound upon a little bit more. It is a fundamental mental paradigm shift. And I don't love the word paradigm, never did, but I really think it's a paradigm shift. Like mentally, you have to look at something different than you would otherwise. And I think that shift, especially if you've been doing a task for many years, is hard for many people.
Yeah. Yeah. I find the part of it that's probably the least natural for a lot of people is if you know, if you're sitting down and you're writing something out manually, you might just be the person who just starts writing. You don't know where you're going to go and you don't really understand the structure you want and you aren't thinking ahead of time about what the output should look
Right.
like, etc. You're starting and then you're just gradually iterating and refining it. And many times to use AI effectively, you actually have to do the work up front to say, what do I want? What are the characteristics of it? How should it not appear? What's the format I want it in? Right? You have to give rich detail, and a
Mm.
lot of people just that's a skill that they don't necessarily practice very often, if that makes
No,
sense.
oh, no, it's 100% sense. And the thought, having something fully thought out or reasonably fully thought out so that you can articulate it in a stream of text or even voice for argument's sake so that you could
Mhm.
explain it. The act of explaining something it's seemingly easy, but it's actually really difficult. It's difficult to explain something. It's difficult to explain something to anybody, storytelling, as I like to tell people, it's really storytelling in a very articulate, very straightforward way. Try doing it, sitting down. Most people don't have the skills to do that well. It's not
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that there are people who are naturally teachers and can explain things to people in a very logical, structured manner, but most people aren't. And not that they couldn't be, it's just not a skill most people practice and have. And yet if you're working with an AI model, it's sort of like you're the teacher and the AI model is the idiot savant. And you have to, very
Right.
powerful, but you've got to be intentional about explaining what you're looking for.
1,000%. And
Yeah.
the more intentional you are, the more specific you are on what you're looking to get out, you're going to get results that are arguably much better. But that intention, that writing it down clearly, explaining yourself in a way that is logical and thoughtful, and for many people is actually very difficult to do.
Okay, so digital or AI natives or AI first adopters, whatever we want to call them, right? I think we've said so far, first characteristic is they use AI for virtually everything. I almost default to I'm going to use AI for this. And then the second big thing we talked about is they they recognize the effort that they have to put in using it. It's not just a casual, I'll just wing something off and hope that AI figures it out. They're working at it. They're doing the integration across different tools. They're creating detailed prompts. Um, they're intentional and they put effort into it. Anything else? I mean, that you think sort of sets apart those AI first people from the average, more casual user of AI today?
I think those are the big ones. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess if you look, those are the obvious, I think, qualities, being able to think things out. But are there certain types of individuals that are more prone to that than others?
Yes. Yes.
And that's the question.
100%. I think so. Because I think the other maybe characteristic I would argue of these people is they are insanely curious and they're willing to experiment because what worked today isn't necessarily going to work tomorrow. And you have to be flexible and you have to be willing to experiment. If you just want a tool that you know what it's going to do every time, we're not there yet. But if you're willing to do some experimentation and critical thinking, then you might be in luck.
Right.
So,
No, 100% agree with you. And I think, it's funny because engineers tend to be on the bleeding edge of a lot of these things. They're willing to sacrifice. They're willing to accept the faults with the tool. But they also understand where, the capabilities lie and how they can get the most out of it. So I think naturally engineers have kind of gone in this direction, especially software developers, embraced a lot of these tools. But I think you're right that natural curiosity
yeah.
um, goes a long way. I also think it takes a lot of out of the box thinking. And it's like when you look at a problem, like I look at a problem now, and it took a while for me to just kind of rejig my brain to think this way. When I look at a problem, it's not necessarily how do I solve it. I mean, yes, it is very often how do I solve it. How do I solve it better with AI? And I look at it that way. So it's
Right.
a kind of a step before it. It's like, okay, fine. How can I solve this with AI instead before I just go off and solve it my traditional way?
No, that's actually a great, I like that viewpoint. How do I solve
You
it
know.
with AI? Because it, to your point, might be a slightly different thought process. Um,
Now,
so, yeah, go ahead.
no question. The question I have for you is, you're a CEO, you're a manager in a firm, and how do you imbue those qualities into your employees to start thinking about things differently? Our favorite
Yeah.
topic, education. But how do you
Yeah.
tell people to think differently?
I mean, look, I think I could give you a nice pat answer, and I do believe this is part of it. Like you have to educate people and train them and make them feel comfortable using these tools and give them the knowledge they need to use them effectively. But,
Right.
and here's the big caveat. I don't think it's realistic for most companies today to get to a place where most of their people use AI most of the time. I think it is still a little too out there. It's too exciting. Going back to our original premise of AI needs to be boring before it becomes a broadly applicable tool. I think right now it's a little too exciting, meaning there's a little bit too much mastery required. There's a little bit too much commitment and experimentation and other things required. And it's just not realistic to think that everybody in your organization is going to use it. In fact, I've been over the last couple of months looking at a couple of organizations that have rolled out tools or made them available to a large section of people. And almost universally, what happens, and this has been backed up by everything I've read as well, is that you have a very steep intake in the beginning. People, or a steep uptake, people start using tools, they're fascinated, and pretty soon they just don't see a reason or don't have a motivation to keep using them, and usage drops off. But if you pick apart those numbers, what you see is you've got a small group of people who are still using the tools very frequently, using at a very high level, but you've got a plurality of people who are just they're kind of bored with it because it didn't really fit the way they work and they didn't see the value or it was too hard or whatever. And I think that's the reality of where we are today. I don't think you're in the average organization, you're not going to get more than some percentage of people actively using AI, not counting AI that's embedded in applications and tools that they already use.
No, I think you're 100% right, though. But I look at it, you're right. But I also don't think you could put out, as an organization, you can't just say to your, a number of employees, oh, by the way, here are these tools that are available for you, and then expect magic to occur. And that
Right.
there seems to be a big disconnect there. Most of these orgs will put out these tools that are, by all means, very powerful and very capable, but then they expect their employees just to pick them up and, like, things are going to occur and magic happens. And, I don't know what they expect. And all of a sudden it goes on saving money and people are experts. And that is not reality. It's not even close to reality. And
No.
it's that gap because you're right. You put them out there, you'll get it, an instant uptake, but it drops off very quickly. Um, I also think part of it, and it's going back to when AI is boring, we're so used to the existing machine computer interface being a UI of some type and typing things out. And I think
Right.
that is um, not going to be the future. It's going to be very different in the future, and it's going to be more geared towards, I would say, I don't know, maybe a voice interface or a visual interface, but it's not going to be what it was in the past, and that's going to make things a lot more efficient, and people are going to start, I think, using them a lot differently.
Also sounds a lot more noisy, but 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 I agree.
Yes.
No, I think you're right. I think it's, people will gradually break out of their comfort zone with these tools. But your point about needing, not just upfront training, but ongoing support to help people adapt and learn to use the tools is a great one. Like it's not a one-time send everyone to a training seminar or something, and then when they get back, you give them the keys to the AI tool and you say, good luck. Right.
Right.
It's a learning process. And
It is right. It is a learning process, and it's one that takes time.
it does. Well, let's speaking of time then, let's fast forward to, I don't know when it is, but let's fast forward to the day when AI starts to get boring. And again, our premise is when AI feels boring, that will actually be a good thing. That'll be a an indicator that AI has reached the point where, as you said, like where a cell phone, where a smartphone is widely accepted, commonly used. You might get excited once in a while if you download a new app or it gets a new feature, but generally, like you're past the point of like staring at it, going, "This thing's amazing," and you're just
Right.
using it, right? And a
Well,
lot of us are still staring at AI, going, "Well, this thing's amazing." We're not really all using it as effectively as we could. So
or is it cursing at it like you would curse at a person because you're frustrated with it's like you think it's
there
a
is some
person
of that
talking to
too.
you. Yes, there'll be
Yeah,
a lot
I
of
I
that.
I might have also engaged in that once in a while too. So, um, yeah. So like, what does this boring world of AI look like to you? Like, describe
I think it's
why
like I
we
think
like this.
I like it. I like it for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think it just becomes part of your everyday work. Well, it's so embedded in your life, you can't see things happening without it, I guess is how I look at it. Like my phone. Most of us can't imagine the world without our telephones anymore. That if, we lose our phone or, we're out of phone for a few hours, well, we think the world's coming to an end. And I think that's very similar. I think it'll get to the point where these tools are so deeply embedded in how we do our jobs, how we manage our life, that we can't really envision a time without them because given us so much in the way of efficiency that at a time that we get with them. I mean, think about the amount of time you save with your telephone and not going to
Right.
a bank or not doing this or not doing that. All these things are not getting lost because you have immediately available directions that's routing you around, the accident that occurred or whatever it may be. Having these tools available are just going to be so embedded into for better or for worse, embedded in every aspect of our lives. That's a whole different discussion about the ethics of it, all of the stuff. But it just is you're not gonna realize they're even there anymore. They're just going to be there.
I like the way you described that. I think that's a great
Mm.
marker of success or marker of boredom, which is success in this point, which is like
Yes.
when we just can't imagine not using it all the time and having it around and having it available. Yeah.
Right.
And the maybe a riff on that concept is, we obviously, you and I have talked a lot about agentic AI and having agents as part of the workforce. And, I think right now when people hear that, they generally like, they go, what? Like, and they also think of it
Right.
as AI is going to take my job. Is that what you're telling me? And
Right.
I think, I imagine in a few years when it becomes boring and normalized, we're going to look at it like this. We have companies today who have all sorts of different people. People who are good at one thing, people who are good at something else, people with decades of experience, people who are entry level. We have interns, we have new hires, we have middle career people, we have,
Right.
experts, and they all have a role to play and they all work together, hopefully, and they all learn. And so when you add agents to the mix, maybe you're just adding just another skill profile. You're just adding another cadre of workers who have a certain
Right.
set of skills. Um,
Right. No, I
so
think
yeah,
you're right. I mean, look, I'm not one for, look, I'm not out there going, the fear factor, everybody's going to lose their jobs and, we're all going to be doing nothing in these agents. Please. I think, look, history has been any guide. Every time there's been massive innovations or upheaval in the market, um, if anything, it's increased the standard of living quite dramatically. It's made us generally wealthier as a population. It's given us time and all other benefits from it. Look, are there downsides? There's downsides with any new technology. Yes, but would any of us want to go
right.
back to society where we didn't have cars, we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, and there's lots of manual labor, and I'd be hard pressed to find anybody that think that's a good idea. Um,
Yeah.
and I think these tools will be the same thing.
Yep. So, and I like your point too about there's always that initial resistance, right? It change is hard, change is scary. We resist. I remember when
Right,
companies were broadly resisting cell phones or smartphones. They were resisting
right,
bring your own device and iPhones because they wanted to have corporate owned, corporate controlled BlackBerry devices. And
right,
we know how that ended. Um,
right.
probably probably half the people listening to this podcast don't even know what a BlackBerry is or never really saw one in person because that was the end of the story for them. And so I think you're right.
Yeah,
We'll go through a period where there will be fear and angst and resistance to having
and
agentic workers as part of the workforce. And then we'll
yeah,
cross over and we'll get to the point where they're just a different type of coworker on a diverse
yeah.
team.
And honestly, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. Like, how do you treat a agentic worker on your team? And that's a whole nother. It's an interesting conversation, interesting theoretical
Right.
conversation, as theoretical right now. But I think you're right. You're right. At the end of the day, look, um, it's good. It's only going to get more powerful. The technology. It's only going to become a bigger and bigger part of your life. And I think for some people, a lot of the pundits out there, even some of the CEOs running some of these companies that generate these models, are out there. Well, you're going to lose half the jobs. White collar jobs are going to go away. I think those are good selling points. They are not
Yeah.
grounded in reality,
Right.
and I think it gets them in the news. It gets a lot of eyeballs on them. Every news agency picks up on it and says such and such said, half the jobs are going to be gone in 3 years. And, those predictions, because people forget about predictions that others make within 5 minutes, will fall into the digital ether, never to be heard from ever again. But all they do is generate a lot of controversy in eyes. But reality, I think, it will not think, I know, will be dramatically different.
Yeah. Yeah. I,
Right?
I just are. We're not going to see the kind of mass displacement of people from the workforce all at once that people are afraid of. So
No.
we had a list of you and I got together and just sort of listed out four broad categories just to sort of talk about like what has to happen for boredom to occur, what has to happen for us to get to this place where it's normalized, right? We talk about
Right.
tools being mature, people being trained, better human oversight, and responsible use. So let's run through
Right.
those four things really quick and just sort of talk about
Right.
where we need to go. And first was the tools have to get better, right? They're powerful now,
Well,
but they have to get easier to use.
they've got to get easier to use. They have to that human tool interface has got to improve dramatically. Otherwise, they're not going to be ubiquitous. Because if they're hard to use, like we have just gone through, and we're the experts and we have massive experience in playing with new stuff. If they're not easy to look, if I can't give it to my mother so she can use it, it's not going to take off.
Right. Right. And it's interesting because like we see, like, your mother could use ChatGPT or could use Gemini Chat,
Good. Right.
but as you know, I went down the rabbit hole with Claude Code last week and was absolutely
I know.
fascinated by what it does. But the usability of Claude Code is couldn't be harder to use, right? I mean, you have to
No.
install
Yeah.
packages on your machine, you have to run it in the command line terminal. Like it's powerful,
It's hard.
but it's hard work.
It's
So the
it's a lot of
tools need to
effort. Yep.
be, it's less about the raw power of the tools and more about the integration and the accessibility and the usability of the tools. I think that's maybe
Right.
the biggest gap that we have to close.
When I could say, Hal, go do this, and it goes and does it for me, we're good. We're not there yet.
Yep, yep. But point two on that list was training. So,
Mhm.
I know you were being facetious and saying how to go do this, but people do need to be trained in how to use the tools effectively, trained in how to, um, explain at a sufficient level of detail what success looks like, what they're trying to achieve, etc. So,
Don't you think also, yes, training in the tools and their application has, but to me, it's even more, it's a fundamental, and you and I have spoken about this a million times, and just the education in general, it's a fundamental shift in how we train people to think. I think has to be
yeah,
different. Or maybe it's going back to how we taught in the past, which is having critical thinking skills and thinking things through, and just a more fundamental standard education that used to exist.
Socrates would have loved
Ah, yes, that
large
was
language models, right? Like,
yeah, the Socratic method of teaching. Yes,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's actually kind of funny. Socrates would have loved large language models.
yeah,
Um, so the third thing, which is closely linked to that, which is humans have to also be comfortable taking on the role of being the human oversight for AI, of being that human in the loop, on the loop, over the loop. There's a few varieties,
right.
but
Yes.
that the humans have to be providing oversight and moderating what AI is doing. We don't want to just be turning AI loose in the world without human oversight.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree to a point. And I think what we don't want is, and it's funny because in some ways these models are getting, I don't want to use the word intelligent. Intelligent really is like not the right word, but at some point maybe they'll achieve a level of potential, even to get AGI. And you don't want to limit, and I know this is going to sound very way out there. Do you want to limit the freedom of the model to think?
Right, right.
So, that to me is scary.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. But we'll always, or at least for a while, I think we'll be taking like a risk-based approach to this. I was explaining to someone the other day, like we were talking about agents. I said, all right, today, if I had a fleet of agents at my command, would I be comfortable letting an agent find a dinner reservation and book it for me? Yes.
Not now.
You know
Oh,
what?
you would. Yeah, that,
Because
yes. Okay, yes.
if it gets it wrong, no, what's
Who
the big
cares?
deal, right?
Right, who
Would I be
cares?
comfortable letting an AI agent plan and book a vacation for me? That's probably a little less likely to happen right now.
Right.
I'm going to want to be in the loop because I don't want to have an agent going off buying a set of expensive tickets to a place I don't want to go or booking the wrong hotel, et cetera, et cetera. And the financial cost, the risk, downside risk to
Mhm.
me could be much larger. And then the third question I asked was, would I be comfortable letting an AI agent go out, search through job listings, find the job, build my resume, and apply to the job and land the job for me, and I just show up and start working at the job? No. Sorry,
I don't
that
know.
one is so far in the future. I don't see that happening. So to me, that's like the risk-based approach that people need to be start
Right.
thinking about is the higher the risk of it being done incorrectly, or the higher the impact if it is done incorrectly, the more you need to be in the loop, the more oversight you need. And humans are historically terrible judges of risk, right?
Horrible
Risk
judges of risk.
risk professionals notwithstanding, humans in general are very, very bad at estimating risk. We confuse likelihood with impact. We are confused by black swan events. I mean, there's all sorts of
All sorts
studies
of
out
things.
there about how bad we are intrinsically at assessing risk.
Right.
So
Interesting way of putting it.
yeah, so that's something we have to get better at. We as humans, yeah, the tools have to get better, but we have to be better at figuring out where and when to step in and how to provide effective oversight. Um, we got our
Yeah.
work cut out for us.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thought experiment. I also wonder as the tools get more expensive and the level of comfort with them goes up, but we're going to obviously, I think, adjust our risk profile quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, right. I can see a time. I can see a time in the next, maybe in the next 2 years or less, when I would be comfortable letting agents book my entire vacation. But the time frame when
Yeah.
I'd be letting agents pick my next job, that's a lot farther in the future. But we could get there,
Interesting.
maybe.
Very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
In our lifetime, you and I are going to see quite a lot happen with this stuff.
So the fourth thing, just to round out our list of like the four, kind of preconditions for AI to become boring, was having a better framework across society and across different societies around responsible use of AI safety and effectiveness and things like that.
Right.
Because right now we're all over the board as a society, right? There's no
Right.
clear-cut consensus on what AI safety means. Um,
No.
You've got, you've got the EU AI Act for the European Union, which has taken a very prescriptive stance on
Right.
some aspects of AI safety. You've got the American model where it's largely not been addressed by the federal government. It's left up to states, and the states are very,
All over the
very
place.
all over the place. Um, so we, I think, as a society, have a lot of work to do in figuring out how we're going to figure out what is the basic standard of responsible, safe use of AI.
No, that's a good question. Well, yeah, it is a good question. And will there ever be a single standard? Because the EU takes a very risk averse approach, for instance.
Yeah,
And it's funny. It's kind of a balance in many ways of innovation versus risk. Whereas the EU's taken a highly risk averse approach to responsible AI, and consequently has had little in the way of innovation. Where the US has been very hands off in many ways and has been highly innovative. So you wonder, and also then taking it a step further, we're training these models with a lot of information. You would think at some point we're going to train them. I hate to say we're going to train them with ethics based on material, but you can't see that happening. Training a model with
yeah,
our ethics from just examples of things that where people have made decisions.
right.
I don't know. It's an interesting area.
You bring out a really good point, which is the regulatory approaches to everything from data privacy to AI regulation in Europe versus the US versus other parts of the world. They're very different.
Mhm.
I do think I would submit to you that there will be some much more normalization across regions of the world than we see today. They will never be fully aligned, they'll never be identical. But if you step back and you look at basic laws governing the land, right, they aren't that different. The policies and procedures are different, the way the legal systems work are different, but theft is theft. Generally, theft is not permissible under law, right? And you could rattle off a lot of things. There are some things that are legal in one country, not in another, but those tend to be more the edge cases. We as a global society, not entirely, but largely have kind of, formed a similar consensus on what should be permissible, not permissible in our society. We're nowhere near that for AI, right? You've got, to your point, you've got people working for large AI companies, model providers who are saying, yeah, we should let AI just, like, who cares if people lose their jobs because it's more AI models that my company sells. So we should just let people be wantonly replaced. We've got people on the other end of the spectrum saying we should keep AI out of the workplace. It's human
Right.
dignity at stake, right? So we're nowhere near as a national or even a global society, we're nowhere near reaching any form of consensus around what is safe and responsible AI, I think.
No, and honestly, I'll take it a step. I'll take you're out. We're not even near and I don't know if we ever will come to a consensus because I think that's going to be hard to come to. I think
Yeah,
personally, I mean,
yeah.
that's just. But I think what would drive that conversation faster or make it more important is once we start putting these models into, and I'll use the term roles, where they're making ethical decisions, or they're making decisions
Mhm.
that have broad ethical implications. And I don't think we're there yet. And I think that's why maybe this is why we're not really having these conversations quite yet.
Right. And, you and I have said this before too. Maybe the other thing that needs to happen is maybe there needs to be some adverse events. Maybe some company needs to suffer a publicly humiliating and financially devastating loss
Right.
because of
Right.
inappropriate use of AI. And I don't wish that on the company, but that's what happened with cybersecurity.
Mhm.
Cybersecurity was, yeah, it's always been a concern among cyber professionals, but
Right.
generally it was something that most business leaders took for granted and underinvested in until there was a spate of very significant cyber attacks and breaches,
Right.
and companies lost significant amounts of money, their share prices got pummeled, and suddenly
Yep.
there were penalties for not doing this well. And now, and I say this all the time, cybersecurity, every company I've worked at recently, the board gets a report from the chief information security officer on a regular basis. It's that important that the CISO makes regular reports to the board. I
Yep.
will feel like we're starting to get somewhere with AI adoption when the person in charge of AI makes regular reports to the board on responsible AI and AI safety. That that's what needs to happen. And it may take a minor catastrophe to force it sometimes.
Unfortunately, catastrophes are what usually drive change. That and regulatory change.
Yes, yes.
It's
So yeah. So
interesting.
I think as counterintuitive as it may have sounded up front, when we talk about AI going from exciting to boring, that's a good thing. Not that we're not
Yes.
talking about less innovation. We're not talking about slowing down the pace of change. We're talking about getting it normalized, getting it to be reliable, getting it to be widely
Right.
used so we get maximum effectiveness. I think that'll
Right.
be a good thing.
No, I think that'll be a great thing. And I think if you look at the just the arc of innovation, and I'll go back to the cell phone, that took a very long time before it was so deeply embedded in everyone's life. I mean, that was the better part
Right.
of over a decade, I would say, minimally, before it was something that was so part of your life that you can't envision being without it. And I think it's going to be similar, if not longer, with AI, where it's, that arc of innovation and the acceptance of it, and it becomes easy to use, and all the systems around it, and the integration, and everything takes place for it just to be there, and you're just using it as a natural extension of your arm, for argument's sake.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. I think you're right, Peter. This is not,
You know,
we're not going to get from earth-shakingly exciting to boring in 3 years. This is going to take a while, and adaptation happens over sometimes over generations. Um,
right,
I will
right.
say, as much as I think it will be good for all of us when AI becomes more boring in the way we define it, it will never be boring to us, right? Like I think it's absolutely fascinating. It will always be evolving. This is not ever going to be a finished work. This is going to be something that evolves, and I think it'll always be exciting if you want the excitement. Um,
Yeah. Oh,
so yeah,
I'm always beyond fascinated. I wish I could remember the quote. There was an Asimov quote many years ago about anything sufficiently I wish I could remember the way it went. Complicated. It appears like
any
magic.
technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic.
Right. And that's what I feel like AI
Yep,
is.
yep, it is. It is.
You know,
Uh,
and
all right. Well, so I think we're looking forward to the boring future, but we're also very happy to be living in the exciting present with AI.
yes.
Uh,
And
Peter, it's
hopefully you
been
and I are making a difference. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It's been a pleasure as always. These
yeah,
these 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 discussions are always interesting, to say the
yes,
least.
and I promise this is our last boring discussion. We'll never we'll only talk about exciting things from now on.
And never boring. Ever.
All right, excellent.
David, a pleasure as always. Next week, I look forward to it as always.
Call me data next week. See you later.
Uh,
Bye, Peter.
Have a good night, everybody. Bye now.